In the early 1990s, the bodybuilding world was living through one of its most intense and competitive eras. It was the age of true titans: Dorian Yates, Kevin Levrone, Flex Wheeler, Chris Cormier, and Paul Dillett. Athletes who pushed the human physique to limits no one had ever seen before. The stage wasn't just a place to show off muscles anymore. It had become an arena where physical perfection was the standard and human potential was constantly being redefined. And it was in this world of giants that a young American named Paul DeMayo began to turn heads. Known by his nickname Quadzilla, Paul had a rare combination of size and symmetry that even veteran bodybuilders couldn't ignore. His legs and arms were so massive and perfectly proportioned that he quickly became a sensation among the new generation of lifters. Fitness magazines began to hail him as the next big thing in the circuit, and fans around the world were asking the same question. Could he be the one to challenge the monsters of the Yates era? This is the story of an athlete who had everything it took to become a legend, but somewhere along the way, got lost between glory and the abyss. To understand how it all began, we have to go back to September 12, 1967, in the quiet town of Wakefield, Massachusetts, where Paul was born. From early on, his life seemed pretty ordinary, no big ambitions or standout moments. He was the oldest of 4 siblings in a modest family, growing up in a typical American suburb where sports and friendship filled the days. In school, Paul played football and baseball, but he wasn't particularly good at either, nor was he much of a student. It was on the high school football team that Paul had his first real contact with strength training. The team's small weight room had just the basics: a squat rack, a bench press, and a leg press machine. What was just part of practice for everyone else became a full-blown passion for Paul. He trained harder than anyone asked him to, constantly pushing beyond what his coaches expected. It was as if he'd found something that finally gave him purpose, something that made him feel completely in control. Within months, Paul's body began to change in a way that shocked everyone around him. His muscles grew fast, drawing attention, and even a bit of jealousy from teammates. His discipline and curiosity set him apart. While others lifted weights because they had to, Paul did it because he loved it. After finishing high school, Paul faced a familiar problem for many young guys: lack of direction. With no clear career path and no proper gym to train in, he took a job paving roads. Hard, backbreaking work, but it paid decently for the time. With that money, he managed to sign up at the legendary Gold's Gym, the birthplace of countless champions. There, surrounded by seasoned bodybuilders and experienced trainers, the kid from Massachusetts got his first real taste of the world that would soon define his life. Training at Gold's Gym felt like stepping into another dimension. The clanging of iron, the smell of metal and sweat, the perfectly sculpted bodies all around. It all sparked a new fire in Paul. His life took a turn one day during a local event at the gym, the Gold's Gym Classic, when he watched none other than Lee Haney, 8-time Mr. Olympia, perform as a guest poser. Haney's presence, his sheer size, power, and charisma, felt almost otherworldly. Paul would later recall, "He was so huge, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life." But instead of discouraging him, that moment lit a fire inside. From that day on, Paul dove headfirst into training. His entire life started to revolve around the gym, his meals, and his rest. While friends were out partying, he was counting calories and planning his next workout. The dream of competing consumed him, and even the veterans at Gold's began to take notice of his drive. His efforts soon paid off. In 1987, Paul decided to enter his first bodybuilding competition, the Massachusetts Championships. He signed up for the teen division without big expectations, just eager to test himself. But what happened on that stage shocked everyone. Paul not only won his category but also placed 4th overall, going up against older, more experienced athletes. He would later describe that night as one of the most memorable of his life. The packed auditorium, the cheers from family and friends, the bright lights. Everything seemed to confirm that he'd found his place in the world. "It was magical," he once said. "For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere." After his triumphant debut in 1987, Paul realized he had the potential to go far beyond local shows. With recognition came the need to evolve. Between 1988 and 1991, he entered a period of total transformation, not only physically, but mentally. Determined to refine every detail, Paul began to model his approach after Rich Gaspari, famous for his razor-sharp conditioning and near-military discipline. At the 1988 NPC Junior Nationals, Paul put his progress to the test, but the results didn't go quite as planned. Despite all his hard work, he only placed 7th. It was a tough blow, but instead of letting it crush him, he used that failure as fuel. Looking at the guys who'd beaten him, Paul noticed something. None of them had his drive or consistency. He knew his time would come, and he was ready to pay the price to get there. Over the next few years, his persistence started to pay off. In 1989, Paul finished 4th. In 1990, he climbed to 3rd. With every season, his stage presence grew stronger, and fans began to notice the young guy from Massachusetts who kept climbing the ranks. His physique was maturing, and the judges were starting to see him as a serious contender for the future. That moment arrived in 1991, when Paul competed in one of the most memorable shows of his career, the NPC Junior Nationals that year. In a nail-biter of a contest, he beat Kevin Levrone by just a single point, a result that sent shockwaves through the circuit. Beating someone of Levrone's caliber was no small feat. That same year, Paul proved his worth again by cracking the top 3 at the NPC Nationals, now competing in the men's division. It was one of the most legendary additions in the show's history. Levrone took 1st, Flex Wheeler 2nd, and Ronnie Coleman finished 4th. Landing among those names officially put Paul on the map. He had stepped out of obscurity and into the ranks of the athletes who would define the decade. After earning his place among the sports elite, Paul DeMayo entered the 1990s with one clear goal: win the NPC Nationals and turn pro. But the road ahead would be tougher than he expected. In 1992, after a string of solid results, he got a piece of advice that would change his path, though not necessarily for the better. A judge told him that to win, he needed to focus more on conditioning. Determined to fix what he saw as a flaw, Paul took that advice to the extreme. For the next year, he lived like a monk of bodybuilding. He trained over 4 hours a day, mixing heavy lifting with long treadmill sessions. He canceled social plans, turned down appearances, and even rejected sponsorship deals to stay completely focused. The result was a razor-sharp physique, but it came at a cost. He dropped a lot of size. By the time he hit the stage in 1993, he weighed around 230 pounds, 104 kilograms, down from his usual around 243 pounds, 110 kilograms. Despite looking incredibly shredded, the judges felt he'd sacrificed too much mass, a key factor in the era of mass monsters. The verdict was brutal: 3rd place. The disappointment cut deep. Paul believed he'd done everything right, and the loss left him crushed. He even wrote a long letter to Flex magazine, expressing his frustration and admitting that his physique still lacked the maturity needed to dominate. It was a rare moment of honesty and vulnerability for a bodybuilder at his level. But instead of giving up, Paul turned that frustration into fuel for one of the greatest comebacks of his life. If 1993 had beaten him with its obsession over aesthetics and scale weight, 1994 would prove that size and symmetry could coexist. The following year, Paul completely overhauled his strategy. He regained the size he'd lost, adding more than 20 pounds, about 10 kilograms, of solid muscle, while keeping the definition he'd worked so hard for. The result was a jaw-dropping 256-pound, 116 kilograms physique, perfectly balanced between mass, symmetry, and conditioning. When he stepped on stage at the 1994 NPC Nationals, the crowd instantly knew they were witnessing something special. Paul dominated the show, winning both the heavyweight class and the overall title, earning his pro card and his spot at the Mr. Olympia. It was the peak of his career. That victory didn't just cement him as an athlete, it launched him into stardom. Within months, Paul was gracing the covers of bodybuilding magazines, starring in training videos, and representing major brands. His mix of charisma and striking physique turned him into an instant icon. For the first time, he was tasting fame, the kind usually reserved for the legends of the Olympia stage. But glory always comes with new pressure. Paul was no longer the promising underdog. He was now a rising star with contracts, commitments, and a growing fan base expecting results. How do you handle the weight of so many expectations without losing control? That was a question even DeMayo didn't yet know how to answer. The year 1995 arrived with massive expectations. After his dominant win at the Nationals, both fans and the media saw Paul as one of the brightest hopes for professional bodybuilding's future. And the biggest stage of all awaited, the Mr. Olympia, the contest that crowned the gods of the sport. That year's edition would go down in history as the Olympia of the monsters, with competitors displaying freakish levels of mass, physiques so huge they seemed to defy human anatomy itself. Among them, Paul stepped on stage weighing around 252 pounds, 114 kilograms, confident that he was finally ready to stand among the best. Reality hit hard. Standing among living legends like Dorian Yates and Kevin Levrone, Paul finished 12th out of 16 competitors, a bitter result for someone riding the wave of fame as bodybuilding's next big star. The emotional impact was brutal. Fans couldn't understand what had gone wrong, and rumors started spreading. Some said Paul hadn't even wanted to compete at that Olympia, but was forced to by his main sponsor, meteoric. Others claimed he simply failed to reach the level of conditioning that stage demanded. Whatever the truth was, that night marked the beginning of his downfall. The judges were blunt in their critiques. His back was weak compared to the rest of his physique, and overall he looked flat, lacking the fullness and density people expected from an elite pro. Paul had always prioritized raw size over extreme definition, and while that had once set him apart, now it worked against him. Despite the disappointing showing, Paul joined the European Grand Prix series, trying to regain his confidence and prove he still had gas left in the tank. But the results were discouraging. His body no longer had the same spark, and his drive seemed to fade. Fans and journalists noticed that the Quadzilla, who'd once electrified crowds, now looked distant, uninspired, almost like his heart wasn't in it anymore. Tired of criticism, pressure, and the grind of the pro circuit, Paul made a drastic decision. He walked away from the sport. There was no official announcement, no grand farewell. He just disappeared. For some, it was shocking. For others, it felt like an omen. The man who'd once stepped on stage dreaming of becoming a legend now found himself lost, trying to figure out who he was without the lights and applause. Away from the spotlight, Paul dreamed of something completely different from the flashy world of professional bodybuilding. While many of his peers chased fame, huge contracts, and global recognition, he longed for something simpler: to open his own gym, get married, start a family, and live a peaceful life. To Paul, true success wasn't about golden trophies, but about finding peace doing what he loved, without needing to prove anything to anyone. It was a humble dream, but one that was slowly slipping further out of reach. Life after competition, however, turned out to be cruel. When Paul left the professional circuit, he lost more than visibility. He lost his sense of purpose. The structure that had defined his life, intense training, strict routines, clear goals, vanished, leaving behind a void that was hard to fill. He tried to regain balance, but the transition from athlete to normal guy was far tougher than he imagined. Without the spotlight, the internal pressure didn't go away. It just became quieter, lonelier. His disillusionment with bodybuilding had actually begun years earlier, back when he lived in Los Angeles, trying to make it in the sports epicenter. In interviews, Paul admitted he felt suffocated by the city and by the insane cost of living. "What I paid in rent could have bought 2 Corvettes," he once joked. Fed up with the superficiality, he moved back to Massachusetts, hoping to find the emotional stability he'd been craving. But peace wouldn't come so easily. Even offstage, Paul remained recognizable in gyms and local events. Fans asked for advice, photos, and words of motivation, not realizing how hard he was struggling to stay motivated himself. The image of Quadzilla still followed him everywhere, like a ghost from the past, a constant reminder of who he once was and who he could no longer be. Meanwhile, career opportunities were drying up fast. Bodybuilding didn't come with a retirement plan, and sponsorships vanished as quickly as they had arrived. Paul tried launching personal projects, but nothing seemed to work out. The simple, steady, happy life he dreamed of was slipping away, leaving behind only the bitter taste of wasted potential. Slowly, the man who had once embodied strength and discipline began to fade, lost between memories and regrets. As the years went by, the light that once surrounded Paul dimmed completely. The athlete who had symbolized power, drive, and inspiration now faced the darkest side of fame, loneliness and emptiness. Without competitions, contracts, or goals, he drifted. The lack of structure and the psychological weight of failure opened the door to something far more destructive: addiction. It began with subtle excesses, then escalated into heavier substances. The man who once controlled every inch of his body had lost control of his own life. Financial and emotional struggles piled up. Paul began withdrawing from friends and family, sinking into a cycle of self-destruction. He tried to bounce back a few times, but his addiction to heroin proved stronger. What had once been strength and discipline had turned into impulsiveness and despair. The same laser focus that took him to the top now pushed him toward the edge. He was no longer the charismatic athlete from magazine covers, but a man fighting a silent war against himself. The breaking point came when Paul was arrested for attempted murder of his girlfriend and drug possession, serving 2 years in prison. The case shocked everyone who knew him. Few could believe that the kind, dedicated Quadzilla had fallen so far. His arrest symbolized the total collapse of a life that had once seemed unstoppable. When he was finally released, Paul tried to get back on his feet, but the world outside the bars wasn't waiting for him. With no steady job and no prospects, he slipped right back into addiction. Even then, some people tried to help him. Among them was fellow bodybuilder Greg Valentino, who spoke openly in several interviews about Paul's struggles. According to Greg, he and other friends sent him money and begged him to get treatment, but nothing worked. "You know what he did with the money," Greg said sadly, explaining that Paul's addiction had gotten so bad he'd started stealing from his own family. The situation worsened day by day, and his parents, emotionally exhausted, eventually had to distance themselves, a painful but necessary decision. Greg described Paul's life during that time as a whirlwind of loss. He wasn't the same guy anymore. That spark in his eyes was gone. It was like his soul had left before his body did. And indeed, everything that once symbolized glory was now just a distant memory. The man who had once inspired crowds at the gym had become a tragic example of how addiction can destroy even the strongest among us. Paul's fall was fast, cruel, and irreversible, a descent into hell fueled by regret and self-destruction. But the worst was yet to come. On June 2, 2005, the bodybuilding world was shaken by devastating news. Paul DeMayo, the legendary Quadzilla, had been found dead in his home in Medford, Massachusetts. He was only 37 years old. His body was discovered by his father, marking a tragic end to the life of a man who once embodied the strength and dedication of the sport. The official cause was clear: a heroin overdose. But the shock among fans and friends sparked waves of rumors and theories that still surround his death in mystery. Many believed Paul had simply become a victim of his own choices, consumed by an addiction that had spiraled out of control. Others, however, suspected something darker. Some accounts from the time claimed Paul had received a contaminated batch of heroin as revenge after allegedly stealing medication from a dealer's mother. Though never officially confirmed, that story spread widely within bodybuilding circles, adding a tragic, almost cinematic layer to his death. An even darker theory suggested Paul may have died during a confrontation with police, possibly during a botched arrest attempt. None of these claims were ever proven, and the case was officially closed as an accidental overdose. The truth remains uncertain, and perhaps will never be fully known. For his fans, the lack of closure only deepened the pain of his loss, an abrupt and haunting end to a man who once seemed indestructible. Among his closest friends, Greg Valentino was one of the few who spoke candidly about what really happened. According to him, there was no conspiracy, no revenge, no police altercation. Greg believed Paul simply took too much after a period of sobriety, something tragically common among recovering addicts. He'd been clean for a while. Then he got his hands on some again, took his usual dose, and his body just couldn't handle it, Greg said in an emotional interview. To him, Paul's death wasn't murder. It was the result of years of pain, impulsiveness, and inner torment. No matter which version people believe, Paul's death left a deep scar on everyone who had followed his journey. Fans who'd once watched him dominate the stage couldn't understand how someone so physically strong could be taken down in such a fragile way. Quadzilla, the man with colossal legs and iron will, had fallen not to a competitor, but to his own demons. It was the cruel ending of a story that had begun with so much promise and ended in loneliness and despair. Behind Paul DeMayo's tragedy lies something far deeper than drug addiction alone. His story is a raw reflection of what extreme bodybuilding can do when the body becomes a man's only identity. In the pro circuit, the physical and psychological pressure never stops. Every ounce of muscle, every bit of definition, every tiny flaw is judged under blinding lights. For Paul, that pressure didn't just come from judges or fans. It came from within. His quest for perfection became his prison, and when his body stopped responding, his mind began to collapse. The environment around him only made things worse. The world of gyms and backstage glamour often hides a darker reality, one filled with parties, drugs, and destructive influences. Paul, once known for his discipline and quiet focus, was eventually swallowed by that lifestyle. Vanity, chaos, and superficial relationships replaced the stability that had once grounded him. The loss of his longtime girlfriend, described by Greg Valentino as the emotional turning point, left a hole he never managed to fill. Without that anchor, Paul became vulnerable to the kind of people and habits that pushed him further and further into the abyss. On top of everything, there was the extreme obsession with mass, a hallmark of the 1990s bodybuilding scene. To stay competitive, Paul sacrificed his health, his rest, and his mental balance. His body became his currency, his sense of worth. And when the stage was taken away from him, he lost his sense of identity. Retirement came with no preparation, no structure, and no purpose. Without the sport, he no longer knew who he was. The man who once controlled everything, his diet, his training, his appearance, had lost control of himself. Paul's collapse is a painful example of what happens when success isn't backed by psychological and emotional support. Bodybuilding shaped him, but it also destroyed him. The lack of a system to help athletes cope with the end of their careers turned his transition into a nightmare. From idol to forgotten name, from champion to addict, he followed a path that, sadly, many athletes still walk today. His story shows that having muscles of steel isn't enough. You need a strong mind to handle the weight of glory. Even after all these years, the name Paul DeMayo still echoes among bodybuilding fans. His nickname, Quadzilla, remains a symbol of raw power, colossal legs, and unshakable dedication. He was, without a doubt, one of the most impressive physiques of his generation, a true living sculpture. But more than that, his story became a powerful warning, a reminder that success, when not grounded in emotional balance and purpose, can turn into poison. Paul proved that the body can be unbreakable, but the mind, not so much. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think about Paul DeMayo's story? Do you think he was a victim of his circumstances or of his own choices? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love seeing your take on these stories. If this one made you reflect, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and shows that you want more videos like this. Also, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes in our series, Victims of Bodybuilding. And if you'd like to support the channel more directly, consider becoming a member. It's a simple but powerful way to keep this project alive and help us keep bringing powerful stories like today's. And before you go, don't miss the video popping up right here. Another unforgettable story about an athlete who, just like Paul DeMayo, experienced both the peak and the fall within the same world that made him famous. Click now, because this journey is far from over. I'll see you there, in the next chapter of this series that reveals the most human and tragic side of bodybuilding.